is the Lord, so worthy of praise. Great is the Lord. One generation will commend your kingdom to one another. They will speak of you. I will meditate on your wonder, and they will speak of your glorious splendor, of your majesty. Every day I'll praise thee, forever and ever. Every day I will praise. Every day I will praise. For you open your hand and satisfy desires of all things. My God, the King. Lord is gracious and slow to anger. He's rich in love. He is good to all. Lord is gracious and slow to anger. He's rich in love. He is good to all who call on him. Truth he is near to end. He hears their cry, saves them. He saves them. The Lord is gracious and slow to anger. He is rich in love. He is good to all. The Lord is gracious and slow to anger. He is rich in love. He is good to all. Good to all. Good to every day I will praise. Every day I will praise. Even now you open your hand, satisfy desires of all things. God the King. My God the King.
Welcome, everybody. This is Torah Apologetics here on Kingdom in Context, and this is our Torah Portions Saturday broadcast. I'm Sean, your host. I appreciate you guys joining me this morning. And this morning we are going to be picking up our study on Deuteronomy. We're going to be finishing out Deuteronomy 21 through 25 mostly. And I've been having some technical difficulties here. Trying to get... I was locked out of my Gmail for no reason this morning, so I was trying to. They finally let me back in. I'm trying to get my. Yeah, it was weird. It was saying my Gmail was unavailable, and so my emails from last night didn't go through. So anyway, welcome everybody. Thank you guys all for being here. G.R. Cleve, welcome. Jared Rice, Psalm 119. Lisa Mendez, Master Soup, Robert Daniels, Miss Marcia, and Mackenzie. Welcome, everybody. Tom is back. Welcome, Tom. Hannibal's back. Windfeather, cover to cover with Jeremy Piers. Kingdom Kid. Welcome, everybody. Krista Dunbar, Rose Shiflett, Jason Kinney. Welcome, everybody. Yaya Q's back. Donna Porter. James Henry, Cassie McGee, Justina Mead. Welcome, everybody. Taya Bear, April Lifton, Jenny Lee, Watchman with the Trumpet. Awesome, guys. Miss Cindy is here. Martha Walder, Collins here. Welcome, everyone. All right, guys. Well, let me open this up. We'll get going. Will my computer work today? Okay. Okay, guys. Let's see if we can get this to work here. Let's try it again. It's still doing it. Okay. There we go. Kingdom Kid is the temple in heaven, brother. The one that's Yeshua's ministering in right now. Temple in heaven. Okay, guys. Deuteronomy 21. Let's go through 10 through 14. So it says, when you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hand and you take them captive, if you see a beautiful woman among them and you desire her and want to take her as your wife, then you shall bring her into your house. She must shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothing of her captivity. After she has lived in your house a full month and mourned her father and mother, you may have relations with her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. And if you are not pleased with her, you are to let her go wherever she wishes, but you must not sell her for money or treat her as a slave, since you've dishonored her. So I think this is kind of a beautiful moment here where the father is allowing for women of captive nations to still be cared for and assimilated into Israel through, obviously they'll be grafted in with this concept of marrying into a son of Israel who is bound by Deuteronomy 13 to keep the covenant. So therefore, she's going to start learning that behavior to keep the covenant. She gets grafted in from wherever she's from. So that's a beautiful moment there. And she cannot be mistreated. And I think that's also, the Father has one law for the foreigner, for the native born. That spirit of Torah is that same concept of, you want to show love to people. And so I just think that this is, it doesn't matter if she was born from someone else. If you take her in and you want to show love to her, you need to show love to her. So it's very beautiful little moment here. Because the reason why I say that is to remind folks, a lot of the information we're going to go over today is good apologetics for you. You're going to get a lot of the content that we cover today. Atheists will try to, apparently atheists have never read these chapters because they try to pull stuff out of context or from other places in Leviticus, or just the general premise of the story. Atheists will try to use just the general idea that, well, why did God tell Israel to go kill these Canaanites? And you're like, well, what were the Canaanites doing? Do you support justice or injustice? Do you support right behavior or wrong behavior? Because if the Canaanites were doing wrong behavior and they needed to be judged for that and stopped, well, that Yeshua is using Israel to do that. And then there's all these circumstantial details that happens once that big event happens. The little details like we just read here, even within the little details, the Father is saying, I want you to treat people with love. Okay. So even if you found a foreign wife, you brought her in and then she displeased you, I'm not sure exactly what that means. We know that it's going to expound later in chapter 24 about the wife being found to be sexually unclean, and we'll explain that later. But right here, maybe she doesn't want to adopt a covenant. Maybe she's refusing to adopt a covenant, like Solomon should have treated his foreign wives who refused to adopt to Yahweh's covenant and wanted to worship their idols. He should have treated them with the proper boundaries and respected Torah and honored Torah, but instead he fell into deception himself. So, I mean, this is just kind of a quick preface, a quick glazing over of this idea, but it's hard to know the entirety of the details of what possibly went wrong in that relationship. Chapter 15, if a man has two wives, one beloved and the other unloved, and both bear him sons, but the unloved wife has the firstborn son, when that man assigns his inheritance to his sons, he must not appoint the son of the beloved wife as the firstborn over the son of the unloved wife. Instead, he must acknowledge the firstborn, the son of his unloved wife, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For that son is the firstfruits of his father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him. If a man has a stubborn and a rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and does not listen to him when disciplined, his father and mother are to lay hold of him and bring him to the elders of the city, to the gate of his hometown, and say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He does not need us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And guys, we've actually gone over this before. I don't have the link right now. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick, because I know a lot of you, if you've just found this in the last year or two, you haven't seen these older videos that we've done. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I'll drop a link for you in the chat. We've done a video on should we stone our sons? It's not pulling up. That's so weird. No help, YouTube. You're not helping, bro. YouTube, you're not helping me. Okay, maybe if anyone remembers that video, it's actually let's see if I can go to my channel and find it on the playlist real quick, because I know a lot of people are gonna be asking about this. Guys, we're not talking about children. We're talking about grown adults. Yes, he's a child technically because he's born from a mother and a father, but he's a grown man. So yes, they would still refer to him as a son, because to be in the place of being a glutton, that means you're not working. Okay, so that's kind of a big deal. If you're not working in a Torah community, you can't just sit around and do nothing and expect other people to provide for you. So yeah, I can't find the clip. Guys, if anyone can find that clip, please drop it in the chat. I'd really appreciate it. But the whole idea is that the idea that it says it's the glutton first, that means you're not working. Torah is supposed to work 6 days a week, rest on a seventh day. So you don't expect that of children. You know what I'm saying? So we're not talking about like it's just rebellious 8 or 9-year-old who's being a brat who needs to be disciplined. That's why you have discipline. This is for a kid. He's out. He's on his own. He's doing his own thing. He could be a grown man at this point. It could be 40 years old, but he's still the son of his fathers, right? Of his father and his mother that might bring a 40-year-old son before the elders and say, "Hey, our son is unfortunately he does not obey us. He's not doing what's right. He's become stubborn and rebellious. He's not working, and he's just drunk." So this is, it's a spiritual issue for sure. All right, someone says they found it. Okay, cool. Hannibal, appreciate it. How does the Bible tell us to stone children? Okay, I was looking up a little bit different title, so it wasn't pulling up. So appreciate it, Hannibal. If you guys want to check that out, that is in the chat. It's on screen right here as well, and we cover that in greater depth. So that's just a short synopsis. Okay. Verse 22, if a man's committed a sin worthy of death, he's executed. You hang his body on a tree. You must not leave the body on the tree overnight, but you must be sure to bury him that day, because anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. You must not defile the land the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance. So if in this system of judgment that they have here back in the day, guys, the book of Jubilees tells us that what Reuben did was deserving of death, but this is in chapter 33. But then the angel tells Moses, as he's explaining the story to him, the reason why we didn't kill Reuben, why Reuben's alive, and why Bilhah is alive is because this law was not yet given to mankind. It's being given to you now here on Sinai, but this particular law we did not give to mankind yet. And that was about taking your father's wife. And we're going to read some of that as well as we delve into some of our companion passages today. But that was one sin that was worthy of death. And the day of, that even says, don't let the sun go down before you exact punishment for this sin. So that's why if that was found out to be a true thing, they would kill him that day and hang his body up for everyone to see on a tree and then pull it down before sunset. You didn't want to leave it up to defile the land, but you wanted to actually bury it properly after it was, once justice is administered. Not everybody may have heard about the story. So then, boom, now, why is he considered cursed? Well, because not only is he doing a horrific covenant violation, but it seems like he's that curse, that reference of that curse is that's that type of punishment he received, is that he was hung up. He was killed and hung up as an example. So this is why Yeshua later is referred to as he took the curse of sin upon us, right? Because he even though he wasn't judged, he didn't sin, and he wasn't judged by Levite priests or elders of Israel in a justified way. He was, betrayed by his people, and he was killed by the Romans in a horrific way. So that because this guy here who did this crime and then gets hung on a tree for just the afternoon or whatever, they're not whipping him with the cat of nine tails, and they're not forcing a crown of thorns in his head. They're not beating him or putting a robe over his face and just beating him randomly. And they're not torturing him basically before they actually kill him. And they're dead by the time they are hung up on the tree. Whereas Yeshua was hung up on the tree to slowly suffocate and die. So that's a huge difference in how the Romans were taking a concept like this and perverting it and causing it to be a form of torture, and a horrific form of torture, which they also try to use the principle of it to scare the people, making it a public spectacle, to scare the people into obedience. And so this is a very similar idea where God doesn't want to scare people, but he definitely wants people to see, hey, this is a sin that deserved death. His body gets hung on a tree, and you are not supposed to do this because you will be killed that day. Okay, this isn't something that is just to let you know that it was pretty strong. Can they ask for forgiveness, and does God grant them forgiveness? I honestly don't know. That's between the Father and that person. Were they truly sorry for what they did? I don't know. We see that in the testament of Reuben that he was truly sorry for what he did. He repented. He actually asked for forgiveness. He didn't even look at his father for 7 years because he was so ashamed of what he had done. And apparently they were, not in their right mind. I think it says there was some alcohol involved too. So, yeah, which I think it's interesting because it just mentioned the idea of someone being a drunkard. I don't know if that has anything to do with one or the other, but it's interesting, right? So let's keep going here. Deuteronomy 22. it says, if you see your brother's ox or sheep straying, you must not ignore it. Be sure to return it to your brother. If your brother does not live near you, or if you don't know who it is, you're to take the animal home to remain with you until your brother comes seeking it. Then you can return to him. And you shall do the same for his donkey, his cloak, or anything your brother has lost, and you have found. You must not ignore it. If you see your brother's donkey or ox fallen on the road, you must not ignore it. You must help him lift it up. I highlighted this, guys, because I think it's so wild that the Father cares about animals so much. And he is telling, look, these are your livestock, and these are your possessions, your pets, and even if it's your cloak, okay? So a piece of clothing, a garment, like he's just saying, look, this is something that you just can't ignore. You can't just let this ox roam and run around. You need to take care of it. And if it got out of the fence or whatever, you just put it in your fence, take care of it, and wait till he comes to seek and returns to it, because eventually he will. Especially back in the day, you've got anyone that might own, sheep or cattle or anything that has large amounts of acreage and has their flocks and herds on those on that large land. You know that you may not get to every piece of your property every single day because it's so large. So some of these guys own property that was so big it'd take them a day or two to get to the end of it. And if if they lost somebody, if they lost an ox or something, and you see it and it's strayed, well, it's supposed to be your neighbor's responsibility to take care of it until the owner comes back. So this is another thing about just that heart of Torah. And what's so wild to me is if our, you guys have heard me ask this type of question when I talk to pastors about whether the law still applies in our discipleship today. And I'll ask them, so, if your neighbor's dog gets out, and it comes into your yard, are you going to keep it? You going to keep it forever? Is it now, is possession 9/10 of the law? Is it now yours forever? Or is it still your neighbor's? You need to give it back to him. Well, that's what this says here in verse 2. Once his neighbor figures out that the animal's gone, he goes to find out, oh, it went to my neighbor's house, and get it back. Well, you're supposed to return that animal to him. How is this a burden? How? Somebody make that make sense to me. How is this a burden? That your neighbor's dog gets out and it comes to your yard, you care for it. We're caring for two animals right now for our mother-in-law until she is able to come back and retrieve them. So, like, how is that? It's not a burden, guys. Keeping the law is not a burden. We've had to slightly adjust our schedule, to accommodate for one of the animals, but ultimately it's a temporary thing. And when the mother-in-law is ready to receive them again, she'll get them back, and it'll be fine. This is not some big bad boogeyman law that has to be done away with. How is this a burden? It's crazy, guys. So even if someone wants to start really trying to make a case, right? Even if they want to go back into Deuteronomy 21 and talk about someone that's committed a sin worthy of death and they're executed. So that's still a thing today that people support, is the idea that certain deaths deserve execution. How is that a burden? It's not a burden. This is administering peace in the society. This is justice. It blows my mind, the type of language that even a pastor can use and not realize he's using, because he just hasn't thought it through. He's not been told to think it through. He's just been told what to think. And that's the problem, is that's why you see me have those interesting conversations. Let me see here. I missed a verse, I think. Verse 5, a woman must not wear men's clothing. A man must not wear woman's clothing. But whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord your God. We're praying for you, RuPaul, and everyone that starts with a T and ends with Ran. So we are praying for you all that you would come to the saving grace and the knowledge of our Lord and Savior and his behavior, Yeshua of Nazareth, who does righteousness, which is God's Torah, his instructions for living. We're praying that the Father supernaturally opens your eyes, brings your right mind back to you, and rids you of any chemicals that may be influencing you or spirits that may be influencing you towards that type of behavior, because it's just unnatural in every regard. Verse 6, if you come across a bird's nest with chicks or eggs, either in the tree or on the ground along the road, and the mother is sitting on the chicks or eggs, you must not take the mother along with the young. You must take the young, but be sure to let the mother go, so that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. If you build a new house, you are to construct a railing around your roof, so that, before I finish 8, let's look at 6 and 7. Here's another wonderful example of the Father saying, look, I care about my animals. I create all these things. I care about my animals. and even something as small as a bird or a chicken, and you're looking over that is henning or roosting over its eggs and sitting on the eggs, and or has the chicks, inside. He's saying, look, don't take the mother. Like if you're gonna retrieve an egg, or if you're gonna retrieve a chick or whatever, and sell it or whatever, don't take the mother. Leave the mother so that the rest of the family can grow up, and there you can continue to propagate life on the earth. Okay, don't break the circle of life. So it's just interesting that even something that seems common sense, but he's just even going through the motions to make sure in a situation like this, you would understand, oh, okay, well, I'll leave the mother. We'll let life propagate. I don't want to destroy the whole family. Um, so just you can take the chick or if you need to, or the egg, but don't destroy the family by taking the mother too. So how is this a burden, guys? Can anyone help me understand how this is a burden to have consideration for the life and family of a bird or a chicken? I don't understand it. And this is, to me, it's the craziness, because people can it just clearly shows you they haven't read the Old Testament. Because I read this and I was talking to my wife, and I said, the first thing I think of is the spirit of the law. Like this is amazing. The father loves his animals so much. It's just love. Obviously, it just becomes such a trite thing to just continually say, well, love is the fulfillment of the law. And you're like, yeah, but what does that word fulfillment mean? It means to do, not to ignore it. So it's just like when you say the word, oh, love is the spirit of the law. A lot of people don't make that connection mentally to what that means in their practical life, like what they're supposed to be doing with their hands and feet and their actions. That's why we love the Torah. That's why we love what the Father's given us in His Old Testament through the law and the prophets. He's given us instruction how to walk out that unction of the Holy Spirit inside of you, that deposit that initiates that spark to do loving behavior. You get the details on how to actually do that. You see what I mean? Otherwise, you might be confused by the flesh and say, oh, you have that spirit of that unction of doing loving behavior, and then you just go through the neighborhood and you grab everyone's cats and dogs and bring them into your yard because you just want to care for them. But then their owners come looking for them because they weren't your dogs or cats, they were someone else's. So if you don't have the details to tell you, oh, hey, it's fine that you have this feeling to take care of them, but you also need to return them. And that might take discipline, especially if one of them's a real cute little bread loaf and you want to keep it, right? So this is where the spirit of the law, which is to love, needs actual direction. And this is why the Father gives you actual direction in how to walk out what the deposit of the Spirit that's been put inside of you, how to, with fear and trembling, with humility and no pride, with meekness, you walk out this amazing gift of the Spirit the Father's put in your heart as a deposit. And since you don't have the fullness of the law written on your heart right now, then you need some of the details explained to you. That's why He gave us His word. It's called discipleship. It's very simple. So let's go back here in verse 8. It says, if you build a new house, you're to construct a railing around your roof so that you not bring blood guilt in your house if someone falls from it. Do not plant your vineyard with two types of seed. If you do, the entire harvest will be defiled, but both the crop you plant and the fruit of your vineyard. Do not plow with an ox and donkey yoked together. Not wear clothes of wool and linen woven together. You are to make tassels on the four corners of the cloak you wear. Suppose a man marries a woman, has relations with her, and comes to hate her, and then he accuses her of shameful conduct and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman and had relations with her, but I discovered she was not a virgin. Then the young woman's father and mother shall bring the proof of her virginity to the city elders at that gate, and say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage to this man, but he has come to hate her. And now he accused her of shameful behavior and conduct, saying, I discovered that your daughter was not a virgin, but here's the proof of her virginity. And they shall spread out the cloth before the city elders. Guys, this seems like the most awkward process of justice in the Bible. But ultimately, it's very similar to what you would see in modern court, where they bring forth evidence to the case, and it's sometimes video evidence, which can be extremely embarrassing to watch for the jury. And other times it's documentation evidence that proves the story false or the narrative true, whatever. So in this regard, they're bringing forth a garment filled with something, and I know what traditional Judaism claims it was. To me, that sounds very. I have no idea how that works or how that happens, because I don't know how long the thing that's on that rag would actually be, I don't know. I just don't understand the process. Never seen it done. Maybe if I ever saw it truly done as Judaism tries to explain this process, or at least seen the garment so that I see that it doesn't fade or deteriorate or disintegrate or like, just, I just don't know how they preserved it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And could verify that's what it was, and could it be falsified? And like, there's just so many questions I have, but I'll be honest, there's not in any of the scriptures I've read, there's not a lot of other explanation that I've found to give more depth on this process of proving the woman's virginity. So, um, verse 18 says, the elders of that city shall take the man and punish him. So if he claims she wasn't a virgin and she is a virgin, well, now the dude's in trouble, right? Because he just slandered her. And he should be take the man and punish him. They're also to fine him 100 shekels of silver and give them to the young woman's father, because this man has given a virgin of Israel a bad name. She shall remain his wife. He must not divorce her as long as he lives. If, however, this accusation is true, and no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of her father's house, and there the men of her city will stone her to death, for she's committed an outrage in Israel by being promiscuous in her father's house. So you must purge the evil from among you. So it was expected that all boys and girls be virgins when they get married. So that was what was expected. Now I know there's circumstances about, second marriages, and then there's other circumstances about paying the dowry if the woman goes back to the father, so she retains her honor. But in general, I'm speaking generally. In general, it was expected that if you were, usually it was an arranged marriage, to be honest. So there wasn't this opportunity back in the day for the little girls of Israel to go, get on their own little donkey and go hang out with other girls of Israel on their little donkeys. And then they all meet up at the market or at the parking lot near the well and meet up a bunch of dudes on their donkeys. Or maybe they have horses, right? Because they got more powerful breeds of animals. I don't know. I'm just telling you, like, I'm just trying to put it in a 3000 BC setting for what we see happening in modern days in cities where all these teenagers run around without any, like I did when I was a kid, without any parental guidance, and they're just running around their cars meeting each other, and then what do you know? Some of them have sex, because that's just biology, and that's what happens when children are unmonitored. So this culture 3,000 years ago, none of that was expected. None of that was the norm. The idea of teen pregnancy was not a thing. And if it was, unfortunately, there was a really horrific consequences. Or she just immediately got married, and that we're going to read about that here in a little bit. So if a man is found lying with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge the evil from Israel. Okay, we see this in Matthew 8. The woman's brought before Yeshua, claiming that the Sadducees or the Pharisees claimed that they caught her in the act. And they threw her at Yeshua's feet and said, "Are you going to stone her?" Well, for one, Yeshua is not the judge. You shouldn't stone anybody. For two, they didn't bring the man with her. So it's not truly, Yeshua, for one, they're doing the process completely out of order, which was par for the course with the Pharisees. They did not follow the Torah. And I don't know how to stress this so much, just I need to make a t-shirt. Just the Pharisees did not follow the commandments of God. It's just that simple, guys. Here was another instance in Matthew 8 where they bring this woman supposedly caught in adultery, but they didn't bring the man. If you truly were trying to have this woman judged and stoned to death because you truly caught her in the act of adultery, well, why'd you let the man go? So there is just so much wrong with that story, and they're bringing to someone that's not an appointed judge, an elder of Israel. It's Yeshua. He's 30 something at the time, and he's not even gotten his appointmentship as the high priest over Israel in the covenant yet in his glorified resurrected body, which is what's promised of the Messiah. And so I'm saying, if the Pharisees were just trying to entrap him as they were disregarding the law, trying to entrap Yeshua to get him to disregard the law. And so this is why everyone ends up just walking away from that situation, because they're not following Deuteronomy 22 at all. Verse 23, if there's a virgin pledged in a marriage to a man, and another man encounters her in the city and sleeps with her, you must take both of them out of the gate of that city and stone them to death. The young woman, because she did not cry out in the city, and the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife. So you must purge the evil from among you. But if the man encounters, so the idea, guys, in case you're following, it's assumed that because the woman didn't cry out, it was not rape. Had she cried out, that means she's being forced, and then she's held harmless. She's not guilty in that situation. But since she didn't cry out, it's assumed that's consensual. So it was a woman's responsibility. Obviously, the dude is not supposed to, try this, but the woman also, if a man tries this, she's supposed to cry out, especially if you're in the city, meaning other people can hear you. There's other people around, right? Verse 25, but if the man encounters a betrothed woman in the open country, now the scenario changes. Right now, there may not be anybody around. If he overpowers her and lies with her, so this is rape. Only the man who has done this must die. Okay, so here's another wonderful moment of apologetics for folks. The Father's law protects women 1,000%. It protects women from rape, and it has the man who raped the woman gets death. You don't even get that in today's justice system. So it blows my mind when people tell me that you've got, the Bible is somehow sexist towards women. Never, not at all. This is very simple. It's right here. The man's got to die. He raped her. The man's going to die. She's okay. She's only if it's consensual, and then she's suddenly, committing adultery. But ultimately, she's clean. She's okay. She's not dishonored amongst her people. She can stay married with her husband. She was raped. She was attacked. And it's considered like murder, as it explains here later. It says, do nothing to the young woman because she's committed no sin worthy of death. This case is just like one in which a man attacks his neighbor and murders him. So this is why rape is such a big deal for women, because the Father likens this unto murder. It's like it's a true assault, right? It's a violation of an assault, and to me, the emotional response that women have to deal with afterwards is as if someone died, right? They're having to it's a huge deal, right? It's a horrible thing. That's why the guy's got to die. So I wish in modern society that we still upheld this law. I wish rapists were killed immediately upon being determined that they were the raper. Verse 27, when he found her in the field, and the betrothed woman cried out, but there was no one to save her. So verse 28, if a man encounters a virgin who's not pledged and married, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they're discovered, then the man who lay with her must pay the young woman's father 50 shekels of silver. She must become his wife because he's violated her. So even in that's what I was saying earlier, this whole teen pregnancy, or, people going out in their 20s and bar hopping and sleeping with each other. Like, no, you would be finding a wife right off the bat. None of that modern culture we have today would have been part of the ancient Israel covenant culture. And then he goes on to say that this dude who encountered a woman that's not pledged to be married and seized her, because remember, what if she is betrothed? Well, then suddenly it's like he's committing rape against her if she doesn't want it. So this is saying that now she has to be a virgin who's not betrothed and not married. And if he takes her and lies with her, well, suddenly he just married her, basically. He must not divorce her as long as he lives. So you can't just bounce from woman to woman. Okay. There are no pimps and players in the covenant of Israel. That is a perversion of wickedness that is glorified in certain segments of our society. Verse 30, a man is not to marry his father's wife so that he will not dishonor his father's marriage bed. Yeah, that sounds appropriate. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Deuteronomy 23, 1-6. No man with crushed or severed genitals may enter the assembly of the Lord. By the way, guys, there's horrific rituals that used to happen. I'm not going to explain them, but it's detailed with some of the Mayan temple rituals where they were doing sacrifices to their gods, which was just their versions of Baal. And they were doing sacrifices, and both animal and human, and the priests would do things to themselves, while specifically to their genitals, in a self-destructive way while these rituals were happening and while they were super high on drugs. So it's very interesting here that you have in Deuteronomy 23:1 that if there is any man who's got what some translations will say mutilated, but it says crushed in this particular translation, or severed genitals, he may not enter the assembly of the Lord. Now, he could have been what I just mentioned, a high priest of another, not just even a high priest, but he just could have been part of an occultic ritual, meaning he'd already did some horrific stuff, and then, or he just become a eunuch. So The father, there's a reason why the father wants his priesthood that wants to come before him to be extremely, without defect based, just like the sacrifices that are brought forward, they have to be without defect. So he wants the people as well, to a certain degree. Verse 2, no one of illegitimate birth may enter the assembly of the Lord, nor may any of his descendants, even to the 10th generation, no Ammonite or Moabite. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Lindsey and I, this is the verse Lindsey and I did some research on a couple years ago. We did kingdom portions. And that verse 2 says, no one of illegitimate birth. This was from incest. It wasn't just from, someone, it wasn't from a previous scenario that we just read about where a man takes a woman and doesn't want to marry her, but he got her pregnant or whatever. No, this is from actual incest, if I'm not mistaken. Verse 3, no Ammonite or Moabite of any of the descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. For they did not meet you with food and water on your way out of Egypt, and they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pithor and Aram Naharaim to curse you. Now, what I love about this, guys, we went through the book of Numbers. We heard about the story of Balaam and the kings of Midian. Balak, I think was his name, who tried to hire Balaam. Well, this just kind of gives you an idea of this region and these cities and encampments of Midian, how they were in apostasy because they actually were descendants of the Moabites, and the Ammonites were the children of Lot. And there's other instances where they were doing Torah covenant behavior, even in Genesis, I think it's Deuteronomy chapter 2 and 3, where it mentions them and how they had already fought the giants themselves and kicked out the giants out of their lands, because they had been given lands as an inheritance by the Father in covenant by Yahweh. So, because they're descendants of Lot, who are a part of Abraham. So it's just interesting to see that over time, and this is what I talked about in my why Yeshua is still doing Torah is unstoppable Melchizedek's. This is why what I was trying to mention, this idea about over time, the faithful Edomites, the faithful Ammonites, the faithful Moabites, they actually were shriveling in faithfulness. And this is kind of where it comes to a culmination ahead when we see in Numbers 22 through 24 and 25 about how once Israel had reached encampment near the Midianites, how there was so much friction and drama because the Midianites at that point had left covenant behavior. And even though they were the brothers and they were descendants of Israel, they weren't acting at all proper. And so it was sad. And they had already started worshiping Baals. So verse 5, yet the Lord your God would not, or let me go back to verse 4. For they did not meet you with food and water on your way out of Egypt, and they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor and Aram Naharaim to curse you. Yet the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, and the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. You're not to seek peace or prosperity for them as long as you live. So this is interesting that the Father is this is one of those few moments in Scriptures. It's also in Jubilees chapter 1, verse 22. But this is one of those few moments in Scriptures where it just straight up tells you Yahweh loves you. So be encouraged. Yahweh loves you. He loves you. That's it. He loves you. Just be encouraged. He seeks your blessing, right? He wants you to be good. He wants your family to be good. He wants to answer your prayers. Learn his ways. Walk in them faithfully. He loves you. It's very simple. Verse 7, do not despise an Edomite, for he's your brother. Do not despise an Egyptian, because you lived as a foreigner in his land. The third generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. And when you encamp against your enemies, then you shall keep for yourselves every wicked thing. If any man among you becomes unclean because of a nocturnal mission, he must leave the camp and stay outside. When evening approaches, he must wash with water, and when the sun sets, he may return to the camp. You must have a place outside the camp to go and relieve yourself, and you must have a digging tool in your equipment so that when you relieve yourself, you can dig a hole and cover up your excrement. So I always just wondered about this. I always just wondered about, I don't know. Look, I know enough in gardening that certain types of animals doesn't make for good compost. And supposedly human waste is not supposed to be used, but there is a way that you can use human waste to become compost. There's just a special process involved. And I've always wondered if you've got, a couple million of the Israelites going through the wilderness and they're leaving their little dig holes behind them of excrement. And that's very interesting because it's almost like they're fertilizing the ground. But I don't know if that truly is a good fertilizer. I mean, especially if they're in a dry and arid desert places, I just don't know how that works because That would just be amazing if like you could see an aerial view of this time period after they get into the land, and you just see, 2-3 years later, just nothing but a big green patch just going all the way through the land where they journeyed because of because of this verse 13 here. I don't know. It's just a weird thought. Just a weird thought, because I have had someone try to explain to me one time how you can use human excrement for fertilizer. It's just not preferred, but anyway, we won't stick on that too much, guys. Verse 14: For the Lord your God walks throughout your camp to protect you and deliver your enemies to you. Your camp must be holy, lest you see anything unclean among you and turn away from you. All right, so verse 14, pretty awesome. The Lord your God walks throughout your camp to protect you and deliver your enemies to you. Did Yahweh himself walk throughout their camp? Was he actually down there with them on the ground walking throughout their camp? I don't know. We know that can't be. No flesh can be around him and live. No, he made Moses hide in the cleft of a rock just so he could pass by and see his backside, so Moses wouldn't die. Who was sent there with them? It was the angel of the presence. And guys, I know there's a lot of people that try to take some certain passages from different targums, and they'll try to say that it was Yeshua. It was not Yeshua, guys. Yeshua was not sent to the earth yet. It was not him coming down and doing all this business here before he came down to do his business. Yeshua is sitting by the hand of the Father in heaven, reigning over all the angels with the Father before he comes down. He's not coming down to do his light work. This is why the angels were created. This is what the scriptures directly tell us. They are the Father's ministering spirit sent out. This is, yeah, super kind of a big deal. 1 second, guys. All right. So verse 15 says, do not return a servant to his master if he's taken refuge with you. Let him live among you wherever he chooses in the town of his pleasing. Do not oppress him. So this is another amazing moment here where it's just showing Israel needs to have this right heart, even towards people that are not native born, right? You must treat the foreigner with respect and love. Do not oppress them. This is so for anyone that wants to teach that the Old Testament endorses slavery, guys. This is right here, just taking Deuteronomy 23:15 and say, look, this is to protect someone fleeing from a master. Why would you flee from a master? If you're taking refuge from someone else, that's your master / employer, whatever you want to, however you want to modernize that terminology, and they flee to you for refuge, well, that means that he's saying, look, you got to let them live among you wherever he chooses. Oh, that's amazing. That means he's not your property. If he doesn't want to live with you, he doesn't have to live with you. And in the town of his choosing, and you do not oppress him. It means you do not take away his basic human dignity and rights. You do not force anything upon him. He's running to you for refuge. So it's just, there is no slavery that's endorsed, guys. This was bond servanthood. This was the idea back then that where you worked. It's very similar to being employed with someone today, except that it wasn't a scenario where you had your own separate house and your boss had his own separate house, and the both of you left your separate houses and convened at a strip mall to work at the business that the guy owned. That's the modern scenario. Back then, usually you went to his house to work for him at his house, and he usually had servants' quarters for you to stay there. So he paid you a wage while you stayed there, and you worked off a debt that you may have owed or something like that. But there was 7 years. It was a time period. It was a short, limited time period. It wasn't eternal slavery, and it wasn't even slavery, because you can't oppress these servants. They're supposed to be working for you with dignity and respect, earning a wage or earning a debt payoff in some regard, which is equivalent to a wage. This is not a concept of, the idea that we solved slavery a couple 100 years ago in the United States and still goes on in other countries, by the way. This is not that type of servitude. This is what the Bible is describing is you must respect the servants. There's a year of release if he's working for you because of debt. And if he wants to be employed with you longer, he can stay with you as long as he wants. But if he wants to leave, you got to let him leave, man. You got to release him, not only of any debt that he may owe you, but also you've got to pay him his wages. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So you can't withhold wages from him, and you cannot oppress him. So this is your basic workers' rights and employer / employee rights, and just being clearly explained so that you can't oppress people and treat them unfairly. So just another example, if you're trying to do apologetics and teach people and you run into, people that are extremely misinformed that just read atheist websites and just parrot all the bullet points in atheist websites, and they'll have this one that, well, why does the Bible endorse slavery? And you're like, actually it doesn't. You just never, clearly you've never read the Bible. So you can take them to 23:15 and it'll tell you that right there. Verse 17, no daughter or son of Israel is to be a shrine prostitute. We're actually going to expound on this in just a minute with the next slide. Verse 18, you must not bring the wages of prostitute, whether male or female, into the house of the Lord your God to fulfill any vow, because both are detestable to the Lord your God. Do not charge your brother interest or money, food, or any other type of loan. So this is something where, this is it's just basically he doesn't. I wanted to do like a full breakdown. I just didn't have time, but I want to do like a full breakdown on the idea of loans today versus, what would a society look like if you weren't charging interest to people and they actually, for one, it assumes people are working, right? So these are not loans for people that are not working. Because people that are not working, they're disregarding Torah also. So this is assuming that a person is working, but they just need something for whatever reason. They need a temporary loan. You're not supposed to charge them loan. And it's going to go into further on, if you're going to take a pledge for a vow, then it has to be a certain amount of things. It can't be something that destroys their livelihood or hurts their family ability to make income. We'll go over that in just a minute. But Deuteronomy 23:17 talks about the Septuagint. There shall not be a harlot of the daughters of Israel, and there shall not be a fornicator of the sons of Israel. There shall not be an idolatress of the daughters of Israel. There shall not be an initiated person of the sons of Israel. So this is something that this is the Septuagint version of what we just read, but as you can see, there's a lot more to it than just there should not be a harlot of the daughters of Israel or a shrine prostitute. Okay, so this also mentions the idea of other acts that are going on with the shrine prostitute. It's more than just the woman, and there's men there that would be the fornicators as well, and there was also male prostitutes, but that's mentioned in other passages. And then it also talks about there should not be an initiated person, which is person that's a part of the occult, that's a part of these Baal worshipers that are part of the temples of Baal and the things that they had to do. And to basically initiate a person means there's someone that has given their allegiance to the temple of the false god. So you definitely didn't want that person to be of the sons of Israel, because then they'd be breaking Deuteronomy 13 for them and their family. So you want to address that quickly. Deuteronomy 23:20 through 25, you may charge a foreigner interest, but not your brother, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything to which you put your hand in the land that you're entering to possess. And if you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to keep it, because he will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty of sin. Be careful to follow through on what comes from your lips, because you have freely vowed to the Lord your God with your own mouth. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, but you must not put any in your basket. When you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pluck the heads of grain with your hand, but you must not put a sickle to your neighbor's grain. So this is just another beautiful moment here of, when you're actually, you can, if you're walking through someone else's field, like Yeshua and his disciples do, and you can grab some of the grains ahead, or you can grab a grape off a vine or whatever, but it's not a grocery store, right? You don't grab a basket and start loading up your basket, right? Because you're at that point stealing from somebody. So the idea is that if someone's hungry and they want a snack, that's fine. But if they're trying to, pull down a whole meal, that's something else. So that's where he's just trying to make sure people understand the boundaries here. Very beautiful. Verse 24, 1 through 5. If a man marries a woman, but she becomes displeasing to him because he finds some indecency in her, he may write her a certificate of divorce, hand it to her, and send her away from his house. And so this is what I was talking about earlier. This is an actual word in the Hebrew that refers to sexual uncleanness or being exposed shamefully in nakedness. And how would you be exposed shamefully in nakedness? Well, that's if you had made yourself naked and, in front of someone that shouldn't see you naked. There's a strong inclination and connotation here that this is a sexual impropriety. And that's why you would find yourself naked in the presence of someone that shouldn't see you naked. You would be exposed as opposed to not being exposed. You're not exposed as shameful indecency and nakedness if you are with your husband, right? So it's a very vague word, I get it, but it kind of lends to kind of deducing the practicality of what we've already talked about, the parameters of a woman and a husband and marriage and things like that. So it says he may write her a certificate of divorce, hand it to her, and send her away from his house. If after leaving his house, she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the second man hates her, writes her a certificate of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house, or if he dies, then the husband who divorced her the first time may not remarry her after she has been defiled, for that's an abomination to the Lord. You must not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance. If a man is newly married, he must not be sent to war or be pressed into any duty. For 1 year, he is free to stay at home and bring joy to the wife he has married. I just think that's amazing, guys. I've talked about that, I think, a couple weeks ago. I won't expound too much, but it's amazing. So a lot of people, every time Deuteronomy 24 comes up, a lot of people struggle with the whole marriage concept, and they really, really struggle. So I just wanted to give a quick little insight into 1 Corinthians 7 as one of our companion passages. Deuteronomy 24, we're also going to look at Romans 7. It says, now for the matters you wrote about. It's good to abstain from sexual relations, but because there's so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife. Do not deprive each other, except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you through your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that gift. Now to the unmarried and widows, I say this. It's good for them to remain unmarried, as I am, but if they cannot control themselves, let them marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband. But if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife. So I just hope people got this point here. Just Deuteronomy 24:1 talks about sexual impropriety, being exposed, nakedness, and shamefulness, which assumes it's going to be to some other person because that doesn't apply to your husband. So therefore, that's a reason to get, clearly she's committing adultery is the idea. So that's why he would be divorcing her, which is what Yeshua talks about in Matthew 5. Okay. But here, Paul is actually trying to talk about the idea of, there is no other true reason to get a divorce. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. So if she's just leaving him because she doesn't like him, he's saying you shouldn't get remarried because then you're not truly divorced in the eyes of God. But I know a lot of people right now are sitting there thinking, but I've been divorced and we just couldn't get along. And what do I do? We've gotten those letters. And guys, I just want to say, we're in a position now where, if you confess your sins to Yeshua, he's faithful and just to cleanse you of all unrighteousness. So this is something where if you whether you were a baby believer or whether you weren't a believer yet, and you've never read the Bible, you understand, how the Father wants people to interact in marriage and divorce, and you and your husband just got married for 2 years when you were 20 years old and realized you didn't like each other that well, and now you divorced, and neither one of you cheated or anything like that, and you got divorced. Like, we're not saying you're damned. We're not saying that this is some kind of irreconcilable sin or anything like that. It's simply ask for forgiveness, move on with your life. But ultimately, just keep in mind going forward, these are the rules the Father wants you to abide by in covenant behavior, which is to remain married at all costs, unless there's adultery involved. And even then, you can forgive the spouse that's as a part of it, if that's what you feel in your heart to do. If you think that there is the appropriate signs that there's that person can actually admit their mistake and change their ways and be more transparent and all that kind of stuff, well, then you can move on past that and stay married. It doesn't mean you automatically must get divorced. It just says that's the only legitimate reason the Father would say, yeah, I get it. Otherwise, you're just walking in unforgiveness, you're walking in pride, you're walking in anger. You're choosing not to get along as opposed to suffering great hurt. Does that make sense? And it's also caps it off in verse 11 with the husband must not divorce his wife. So this is coming from the guy that wants to be single. He doesn't want to get married. And he's still saying, look, he's not advocating for divorce. And he's saying, look, you're going to get married. You must not divorce each other. So verse 12, to the rest, he says this, not I, but the Lord. If a brother is an unbelieving wife and she's willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has an unbelieving husband and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified through his unbelieving wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her unbelieving husband. Otherwise, your children will be unclean, and now they are set apart. They're holy. So this idea is, guys, the word sanctification is someone that's learning discipleship. They're being cleansed from bad behavior and walking into new behavior. So this is why it's talking, it tries to set the caveat. If an unbelieving husband, if a woman has an unbelieving husband, and he's willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. So what does that mean? What if he's not willing to live with her? Can she divorce him? That's something I would talk with your family about. I would talk with your elders and your spiritual advisors about, or your pastor, or whomever you're with, your assembly leader or whatever. But this is, if he's not going to be in covenant, what does Deuteronomy 13 tell us? What's he doing if he's not wanting to be, because this is what it means to be an unbeliever. If you're an unbeliever, you don't want to be in covenant with God. You reject the Father, you reject the Son, you reject their behavior, which is the 2 commandments of God, the covenant of Israel. So then if you reject that, what are you doing with that relationship with the woman that wants to go towards that? So where's that strife going to happen? Where's that friction going to happen? When he says, I want to go over here and go to a swingers club. And the wife says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to live like that. I'm not like that. I want to serve Yahweh. I want to be pure and I want to just be with you. And he's like, well, I don't want to do all that. I want to do this. So all I'm trying to say is, like, if the unbeliever tries to leave, that's something else, because the whole term is qualified with unbeliever. They don't want to be in covenant. So therefore, you're not going to be one flesh. You're not going towards the same spiritual goals. But it's saying if he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. That's the caveat. If this unbelieving husband is willing to stay there, now if he's trying to get you to do things that are illegal or against the covenant, I mean, there's a whole other system of boundaries that you want to talk about with someone that you feel close with that can protect you. And that's a whole different thing if it's talking about abuse. Just like the Father doesn't allow abuse for women nor his animals. You don't allow abused children. You don't abuse women. You don't abuse animals. You don't abuse people at all. You can't even oppress someone that's a foreign captive from someone else. Okay, definitely can't oppress your wife. So that's a little bit different situation. But this is in a scenario where a woman has an unbelieving husband, and he doesn't want to leave. Well, this is why he's saying, and the unbelieving the husband is sanctified through his believing wife. Now, the word sanctified isn't a magical term that just means you're automatically okay. It's a process that you walk through in discipleship. So the idea is that one woman becomes an unbeliever, the husband hasn't got on board yet. Well, guess what? Teach him. Show him the way. Be a woman of good rapport. Be a woman following after the covenant behavior. As you become like Jesus, now suddenly your husband sees that example, and he is allowed to, given him example to disciple, which is the sanctification process, because he's willing to stay there. He's willing to live in that relationship where you now are a believer and he's not yet. But the whole thing assumes that he will become one because he's going to be sanctified because of you. Because he's going to be literally in your proximity, living with you. So therefore, if he's living out away from you, he's not going to be sanctified. He's going to be adopting your behavior. So this is why, like inversely, the unbelieving wife is sanctified. She chose not to leave. If she's willing to stay, then she also is going to learn proper covenant behavior by watching her husband. That's the point of it, saying her being sanctified through her believing husband. Sanctification is not a magical word that's sprinkled on you and then you're suddenly okay in the eyes of God. It means you learn a process of discipleship. So, and then he just kind of tags on there, otherwise your children will be unclean, but now they are set apart. So he's talking about scenarios that he's already seen where the children would be people that are, and he's actually using a Pharisaic term in reference to people who are outside of covenant, calling them unclean, right? But he says now they're set apart, now they're holy. That means in what he's referring to in his mind, the example he's using of whether it was the husband or the wife that was unbelieving, it doesn't matter. It was a couple where one was not believing at the beginning, but then they got sanctified, and now their kids are being set apart too. So this is actually a really beautiful, hope-filled admonishment and breakdown from Paul, if people just give it time. He goes on to say, but if the unbeliever leaves, let him go. The believing brother or sister is not bound in such cases. Why? I know that I didn't put this companion passage with Deuteronomy 13 a couple weeks ago, but it's the same idea, guys. We talked about this idea of a husband and wife in Deuteronomy 13 scenario, where if the husband has decided to go worship Moloch or Baal or Ashtoreth, he's left the covenant. He's out to the farm, and he's either going to drag you with him, or he's leaving you, because he has to defect from Israel. In that scenario back then, otherwise the elders of the people and the judges and the priests and the Levites would apprehend a man that is trying to teach and encourage that's worshiping Molech and Baal, which was horrific practices. He's killing people and doing horrible things, and he's trying to get other people to do it too. So that's the point of, hey, if he's an unbeliever and he wants to leave, you got to let him leave. It's fine. That's going to hurt, sure, but the positive situation is there's hope, and there's a lot of opportunity for a husband and wife to actually become a believer and get sanctified and go through the discipleship process if they stick around in the house. But if you become a Christian and the spouse or the partner just says, I can't handle this, I got to go, and they leave, it's a sad situation. It's really sad, but you let them leave. But remember, husbands and wives, if you become a believer and your other spouse hasn't, you must not divorce them. They must be the one to leave. Because that scenario, if you truly are trying to follow Christ and walk in covenant behavior and learn the commandments and do them with mercy and patience and love, it'll rub off on them. They'll see that amazing change. They'll see that amazing light. You're letting your light so shine before men. And they will eventually become a believer. This is what Paul's trying to say. That's if they stay in the house. I hope I'm sorry to take time with this, but we get so many questions on this, and it's not cut and dry like just one sentence. It does require a paragraph or two of trying to break down different scenarios for people. But hopefully that's some sort of help. Verse 16, how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Okay. So ultimately, I just hope people focus on this right here where it says, God has called you to live in peace. So when you do the covenant behavior, when you do commandments, the Torah, you walk in peace with God, and you're trying to create peace for your home. But if there's an unbeliever that wants to stay with you, well, he's going to see that and be affected by that, right? I'm sure you'll be praying for him at the same time. But if they want to leave because them staying causes nothing but strife, and they're trying to get you to leave the faith, or they're trying to do horrific things that worshiping other gods, you let them leave. It's fine. It's gonna be rough, but God will bring you through, and you'll overcome. You'll find He'll bring you someone that was courageous enough to do the commandments and accept repentance, because that's really all it is, guys. It's just courage. Some people have it, some people don't. Some people learn it to get it, and some people haven't gotten to that point in their life yet. So Romans chapter 4, I included this because I'm ornery. Do you not know, brothers, for I'm speaking to those who know the law. I thought it was appropriate since we're going to Deuteronomy 24, and I knew I was going to be talking about 1 Corinthians 7 and this idea of the law pertaining to marriage. Verse 1, guys, this is not about covenant Israel being divorced by God. I just want to throw that out there right off the bat. Verse 1, do you not know, brothers, I'm speaking to those who know the law, that the law is authority over man as long as he lives. All right, so here's our Torah apologetics moments, folks. When people say to you that the law is done away with, Paul tells you in verse 1 that as long as you're alive, the law has authority over you. This is what he's also trying to say in Galatians chapter 2 or chapter 3, 19 through 24 about the schoolmaster, and then we get presented to Christ. And, so that's why we had to learn what the schoolmaster has to teach us, which is the law, because when we get presented to Christ, we get a resurrected body with the law put on our heart permanently, and we behave properly in front of Christ forever. Because he's the one that evaluates our behavior, right? So verse 1, I'm going to read it again for those in the back. Do you not know, brothers, from speaking to those that know the law, that the law has authority over a man as long as he lives? The law of Christ? Yes. What is the law of Christ? It wasn't the law of the Pharisees. It wasn't the law of tradition. It was the law of doing the commandments of God. Moses didn't make anything up. It's the commandments of Yahweh. It's his behavior that he passed on to mankind to practice. And if you break it, there's some consequence. There's penalty. As we've been reading some of those penalties in Deuteronomy 21 through 24. So as long as a man is alive, the law has authority over him. So this is if you're in covenant behavior, right? Who's he talking to? Romans, who were converted to the covenant of Israel. They're grafted into Israel. So Paul, in his mind, is speaking to Israelites in covenant. What are the terms of Israel's covenant? The commandments of God, the law. So Paul is speaking to people who know the law. They're in covenant. These are believers expected to do covenant behavior, the law of God. He's saying, as long as you're alive, the law has authority over you. So if you transgress the law, well, then you've transgressed, that the curse of the law, sin and death will come into play. But if you walk in the Spirit, then you'll be subject to the law. He goes on to explain that in the next chapter, Romans chapter 8, 5 through 8. So he's trying to explain this idea right off the bat. Tells you you're under the law of the authority of the law because you're alive. So if you're still breathing, the law still applies to you. Practice it. Okay? Verse 2, for instance, the married woman is bound by law. Now he just gave a preface. He just gave an announcement of an idea that as long as you're alive, the law applies to you. Now he's going to give a specific example. He says a married woman is bound by law to her husband as long as he lives. Okay? So we've been reading about that in Deuteronomy 22. But if her husband dies, she's released from the law of marriage. We read about that in Deuteronomy 24. Okay, cool. Makes sense, right? Because that dude's dead now. So then she's released from that marriage. So then if she joined to another man while her husband is still alive, she's called an adulteress. Okay, we read about that too. But if her husband dies, she's free from that law and is not an adulteress even though she marries another man. Okay, makes sense. We read about that. Yeah, makes sense. Deuteronomy 24. Verse 4. Therefore, my brothers, you also died to the law through the body of Christ. So if I thought that if I didn't understand the use of a metaphor, and I tried to take this just at superficial face value, then I would immediately, if you have any understanding of the law, you would immediately think, so wait, is verse 4 contradicting verse 1? Because he just said that I am under the authority of the law as long as I'm alive. Nowhere in the law does it say if another man dies, you're released from the obligation to do the behavior of Yahweh. It's not what it says. And that's not what Paul's saying either. He says, as long as you're alive, you're under obligation and under the authority of God's instructions for living, his Torah, his law. Verse 4, therefore, my brothers, you also died to the law through the body of Christ. So he sets up a principle. He gives a specific example in verses 2 and 3 from the law itself about how something applies to you until your mortal body dies. But then he goes into verse 4 and he says, you also died to the law through the body of Christ. Does that make sense to take literally and say that you died? Because he already prefaced the only way that the law doesn't have authority over you is if you're dead. And if you understand the resurrection, it's because you get it put on your heart permanently in your new incorruptible body. So therefore you never transgress it again. So you'll do it faithfully and perfectly. You never have to worry about transgressing it again. Okay. The law is over authority of you to train you right now in the mortal flesh. But at the resurrection, after you die and you get your new life, the law's in your heart. You no longer have to learn it. You don't have to be trained by it anymore. This is the promise of the new covenant. But to the people he's talking to in verse 4, they're not dead. And there's nothing in the scriptures that tell us that someone else dying releases your obligation to do covenant behavior. He's already explained the resurrection in great detail to the Romans, guys. It is the promise of the covenant. He's going to go on in this chapter and the next chapter to further explain the resurrection with great detail. And in chapter 10. His audience has been taught Torah. That's why he's saying in verse 1, to those who know, I'm speaking to those who know the law. Guys, what does Torah promise you? For Leviticus 18:4-5. If you do my statutes, ordinance, commandments, you will live. It's the eternal life promise of Torah. It's John 3:16, back in Leviticus 18. It's also technically in Deuteronomy or Genesis chapter 22, the promise to Abraham that you and your descendants will live in this land forever. Abraham died. He didn't get that promise yet. The resurrection is assumed and it's detailed in the promise of the covenant. Israel is in covenant with Yahweh. The requirements of that covenant is that you do Yahweh's behavior, and the benefit and the promise of that covenant is that you'll have a blessed, awesome life in this life if you do that, and then when you die, you get resurrected and get eternal life and get to do that same behavior, that same covenant behavior forever. So in verse 4, he's saying to his audience who already knows the Torah, they already understand this idea that the law is your schoolmaster, teaching you right behavior until you die. Then you get that right behavior permanently put on your heart forever. That through the body of Christ, you died to the law, that you might belong to another, to him who is raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit to God. How do you bear fruit? That you do the commandments. What's the inference here? To him who is raised from the dead. What's he already explained in 1 Corinthians 15? That just as Christ was raised from the dead, so will we be. And if the resurrection doesn't happen, our hope is in vain. Because that's the whole point of the covenant, is that Christ was raised from the dead, and that's also the promise extended to us through the covenant, that we get raised from the dead as well. But the body of Christ was the sacrifice, Hebrews 10:4, that God prepared a body for Yeshua to sacrifice, to give over his will, to allow his body to be tortured and killed horrifically on the cross, so that he could get to his resurrection, to the priesthood promised of him, that allows him to resurrect the people Paul's talking to right here. And once these people get resurrected, because that's how the covenant works, that's the promise of the covenant, they no longer are trained by the law. They get the law permanently written on their heart forever, and they're presented to Christ because they're under his authority. He's their shepherd. See what I'm saying? So this is verse 4, guys. I know sometimes we talk about milk and meat. This little passage right here in Romans 7 is super meat. He starts right off the bat, and he's saying, guys, you better know the law for what I'm about to say. Otherwise, you're probably get confused. Just like Peter says, those who don't know the scriptures, they also twist Paul's words, just like they do the scriptures. Guys, this has nothing to do with remarrying God. You're already promised to be made peace with God in eternal covenant, Ezekiel 36, at the resurrection. He puts his spirit in you, puts his behavior in you, his statutes and ordinances. You're at peace with him forever. That's the promise of the covenant already. This is not some bride remarriage doctrine here. This is him explaining how God dealt with people dying and divorcing through his law, and then using that as the foundation for you to understand that because of what Christ did on the cross, he's now in this position. He accomplished what he needed to in perfect obedience, selfless obedience, even unto death on the cross. Now he's resurrected and he's in his glorified position. So therefore, now you died to the law that was over you because of his body on the cross. So it's called a proleptic statement. He's assuming you understand the mechanics of these heavier issues of the application of the covenant leading to the resurrection and how that's accomplished through the priesthood of Yeshua. So then that's why he can make this quick metaphor of these ideas, because when you die, you go to your new body, the new covenant is put on your heart. This new law, the eternal law of God is put on your new heart that's incorruptible. You'll never transgress the law again. So you died to the authority of the law that was over you because it was training you and then sometimes punishing you when you got out of line. You'll never have to worry about the transgression or the punishment part again, because what Christ did accomplished the purposes for the Messiah to become your high priest, raise you to eternal life, give you that eternal behavior. You'll never have to worry about the punishment again. That's how you bear fruit to God, is doing that behavior. And you'll bear fruit forever after the resurrection. You get your new body, your new heart, and you're doing his behavior perfectly. So this is why this little passage is you just got to know the Torah. That's all it boils down to. And when I see pastors, with all love and respect to these folks, but when I see pastors continue to take this passage and say, well, see, this is what it meant when in Jeremiah chapter 3, Yahweh divorced Israel. This is why Jesus had to die. And you're like, that's not what Jeremiah chapter 3, 8 through 12 even says. That's not what Romans 7 says. That's not what Deuteronomy 24 even has any context about. And that's not what Romans 7's context is about. That's what's called eisegesis. You make up a story and you find seemingly appropriate wording to fit. And you put them together, as opposed to keeping things in context. And that's what we try to do here, is keep it in context. Paul is talking about the resurrection here, guys. He's talking about the promise of the covenant. When you step into the new covenant and get that law permanently emblazoned in your heart at the resurrection, that's how you've died to the training of the law, who has authority over you to punish you if you mess up, because you're going to be in the future in a place where you won't mess up. So that's just, hopefully, I apologize to take too much time on that, but it just needs to be said, needs to be expounded. I talk about this in my bride series, but I think in the past 2 or 3 years since I made that video, I think I've gotten a little bit more precise, I should say, in how I explain the ideas. And like I said, that we belong to Christ now because he's our high priest and our shepherd over us. So just like the high priest of Israel, you present yourself to the high priest. He then in turn sees, okay, you're ready, you're clean, your heart's good, turns around, and he offers mediation for you before the Father, and he quote unquote presents you to the Father. So that's why we're presented to Christ in this metaphoric language here, because he's our high priest. So anyway, I just hope that you guys, I hope that was making the point for you. Thank you for letting me expound. Deuteronomy 24, 6 through 11. Yeah, Susanna, she says this is wrecking more churchology she's been holding on to. It's a T-bone steak. Yeah, it's if there's any moderators in the chat, guys, try to keep it peaceful in here in the chat. And if people need to be put on timeout for a little bit just to kind of calm things down, please use that option. So yeah, Susanna, the idea of, there's so much churchology that teaches both inside Torah communities and outside Torah communities. They teach this idea of this marriage metaphor between believers and God, and like we're all going to be getting wedding dresses somehow. And it's just, people just take metaphors to the extreme is what happens, is the problem, because they don't know that the resurrection is the ultimate gift of the covenant in the Old Testament that Paul is talking about everywhere in the New Testament. So that really gets them into a lot of trouble. Verse 24, 6 through 11. Do not take a pair of millstones or even an upper millstone as security for a debt, because that would take one's livelihood as security. I love that. I love that, guys. You can't put up your house. You can't put up your business for a pledge on a debt. Isn't that amazing? You can't go take a loan out at the bank and put your house down as collateral, or your $5,000 tool set, because you're a mechanic. And then therefore, if you somehow default on the debt, they take your livelihood. That happens today in modern times. That happens with current banking system. And Father's covenant behavior, Father's covenant Israel, that wouldn't happen. It would not happen. If a man is caught kidnapping one of his Israelite brothers, whether he treats him as a slave or sells him, the kidnapper must die. Hallelujah. I love it. All those abducted children every year, kill them. All the little white vans running around taking kids or taking teenagers, sometimes taking young women. Let them be put to death. I agree with the Father. Kidnappers should be put to death. So you must purge the evil from among you. In cases of infectious skin diseases, be careful to diligently follow everything the Levitical priests instruct you. Be careful to do as I've commanded them. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the journey after you came out of it. By the way, let me back up real quick, guys. Think about this for 2 seconds. Verse 7. If a man is caught kidnapping one of his Israelite brothers, whether he treats him as a slave or sells him, the kidnapper must die. So you've just oppressed. You've not only you've forcefully taken someone from the family, but now you're oppressing them, treating them as a slave. You got to die. Another apologetic to show the Father doesn't allow slavery. You sell him. What are you selling him for? Do you guys know the slave trade, the selling him part was not condoned, but also specifically, why would you kidnap a person? This is a little bit of conjecture, but guys, the slave trade and specifically the human trafficking, I should say, has always been a part of the occult. It's always been how they take and indoctrinate and abuse and misuse humans, boys and girls, since immemorial. Like for thousands of years, that's how they've done it. And they were dealing with this in the days of ancient Israel as well. So why would this guy die? Same reason for Deuteronomy 13. He's left covenant behavior. He's high probability that he's doing this because he's human trafficking, which means these people are going to be sexually abused or killed or sacrificed. So he's this dude. Yeah. Yep. Run him through. When you lend anything to your neighbor, do not enter his house to collect security. So this is interesting because this is like, have some respect, man. You lend something to your neighbor and he wants to bring out something from his house as security. Yeah, just hang out. You just chill on the sidewalk and you let him go find what he needs to. You don't go rummage through his house and start picking out, oh, I want that for security. Yeah, oh, give me your PS5. Yeah, until you pay me back. No. You let him. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to do the deal, then don't lend him anything. If you don't like what he brings out as a pledge. But ultimately, you don't go in there like you're some mafioso or some weird loan shark trying to come in and find what he values as valuable for security. Verse 11, you are to stand outside while the man to whom you're lending brings security out to you. If he's a poor man, you must not go to sleep with the security in your possession. Be sure to return it to him by sunset, so that he may sleep in his own cloak and bless you. And this will be credited to you as righteousness before the Lord your God. So guys, even when there's a situation of lending something, security must be paid in a pledge. You can't even keep it overnight. Why? Because every man got paid daily. We're about to read about that here in a minute. Every man got paid daily. So the idea was that he may come and give you all of what he owed to you by the end of the day because he just went to work that day, or he may give you a part of it to show you in good faith that he's going to pay it off or whatever. And maybe the next morning you show back up and he gives you the cloak again for the day, but you return it again by the end of sunset until he's paid off his full balance, whatever. The point is, if this guy's in such destitute and he's working hand to mouth every day, you don't want to make it even more advantageous to him by taking his only possession and holding it overnight when that could keep him alive that night in warmth to get to the next day, get that next day's wage, pay off his debt to you and be okay and start building his life back again. So the whole point is it's insulating responsibility for both parties and mercy on behalf of the person that's in financial trouble. This is powerful, guys. This is powerful. And so is the next verse. Verse 14, do not oppress a hired hand who is poor and needy, whether he's a brother or a foreign resident residing in one of your towns. You're to pay his wages each day before sunset because he's poor and depends on them. Now, this doesn't apply just to the poor. So, Lord willing, guys, I know a lot of you guys know that I've been working with some people in consulting for, it's been almost 2 full years now. And we've been working on this thing called Lighthouse. And guys, pray for them. They've run into a ton of obstacles, but they are getting into a testing phase. Just taking a lot more time than they initially thought because of the obstacles, and I can't share all the details about that. But they've told me, because I've promoted them and gotten them a lot of attention, and I haven't told people this, and I guess at this point it really doesn't matter. So I can probably tell this, but um, last Thanksgiving, um, someone that was friends with the Trump administration, they actually found out about Lighthouse, and they contacted me, and they asked me if I wanted to present Lighthouse to Tiffany Trump and have the Trump people endorse it. And that the people about Lighthouse, they turned that down. They didn't want that. They wanted just to start on their own, right? They didn't want political endorsements from either side. But that's wild. That was just the Father blessing us and showing us what's possible with something like this. And so, because even people at a high level saw that what we were building was ridiculously good. But that's also been an issue with some of the other things behind the scenes about some of the issues they've run into, is that the enemy also sees that what they've built is ridiculously good, and it can be a true threat. So the enemy's trying to throw some stumbling blocks in front of us. So just pray for the people that are working on Lighthouse. I still am involved in their meetings every week. You get to hear what's going on, but just pray for them. And so it's just fascinating, though, that if that works out, if that they said that they would bless me. Let me just put it like that. They'll bless me. I can't really tell you how they're going to bless me, but if that becomes successful and works out and they get that off the ground, get their feet under them, that they want to bless me for helping them. And so my goal in the future, if I had extra funds, is to start a certain type of business where I build aquaponic greenhouses and have an actual system set up that other states can multiply and put the designs online and let people and the whole app and everything involved. And so people could do like their own neighborhood by neighborhood trading system of food, and everyone is growing food in their own backyard. And you could see, like, I've got a whole plan, right? And so I just need several $100,000 to accomplish that plan. And so if that ever becomes a reality to me, I want to do this verse right here. I want to do this verse. I want to have the ability, whether it's the technicians that are monitoring the greenhouses on a daily basis, or it's the salespeople that are going out and exploring new neighborhoods and expanding the business so people are growing their own food in their own backyard, or it's the people in the administrative offices. I want to pay everybody every day. They'll still have a set wage per month or a salary per month. But as far as that would be prorated and turned into a daily wage, so they get paid every single day. I have this feeling that our economy would completely change if people followed this verse right here. I'm talking like this false system of this Ponzi scheme that we call the U.S. economy, where there's money lended into a society and then other people have to come in. I mean, if you guys don't realize, that's how the banking system works. They make money by taking out loans for you, by giving you a loan. That's how they perpetuate themselves. It's a little more I'm giving you a very short overview. It's way more complicated than that, but that's the general premise, is that it's not built on an idea of effort put forth into something, and then that any excess can be invested, but your daily wage is always taken care of. It's some people wait an entire month till they get paid, and they have to put off bills and put off other bills and wait on certain things. And so therefore all those businesses, like, so say we'll just go with a random name, like the Johnson family. Okay, so the Johnson family, he only gets paid once a month, right? His wife's taking care of the kids, she's at home, he gets paid once a month. Say he even gets $4,000 a month after taxes. Okay, that's still, depends on how many kids he has, it's not that great in our society with the cost of goods and services. But say he needs to go and he needs to get something done, right? Say it's the 15th of the month. He's got 15 more days left. He's only got $1,000 left. He still has 2 more bills to pay. And his car breaks down for a $300 repair bill. And he's like, I'll be cutting it too close. That means by the time I pay these other bills and that car repair bill and the rental car for the days that the car's in the shop, I'm going to be left with like $100 for an entire week. And I got a family of 3 kids or 2 kids or whatever. So that puts a great amount of stress on a man trying to make decisions for his family. So what's he going to do? He's going to take the bus. He's going to walk. He's going to Uber to work. He's not going to get that car fixed. It's too much at that time. He has to wait till the first of the month. And then what's that going to do? That's an extra expense that he wasn't planning for the next month. That puts him behind. He's going to have to budget differently or maybe pick up extra shifts, which means he's at the house less to his family, get a second job. You know what I'm saying? So there's all these problems that come about if you're not getting paid daily. There's something extremely powerful with this model here that the Father's put in place. And anyway, I stop ranting, guys. I apologize. We're in 1 hour and 30 minutes right now. I just that's my dream. That's my dream for the future. I've got a business plan. I've got, an idea for how to accomplish that so people can grow food on their own and teach them how to grow food on their own. And have a system set up where people could barter with each other amongst their own towns and communities. And then all the people that work for that company actually get paid daily. So what would happen with them and their families? Anyway, we'll see if Lord willing, if I can get to that spot, if the world doesn't self-implode by then, that's on my bucket list. It's on my goals. So here we go, guys. Verse 16, fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor children for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sins. If you guys are more interested in that verse, go check out Ezekiel 18. It kind of expounds on it in great detail. Deuteronomy 24, 17 through 20. Do not deny justice to the foreigner or the fatherless. Do not take a widow's cloak as security. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. The Lord your God redeemed you from that place. Therefore, I'm commanding you to do this. If you're harvesting in your field and forget a sheaf there, do not go back to get it. Guys, look at verse 17. I didn't highlight it, but look at verse 17. Do not deny justice to the foreigner or to the fatherless. Do not take a widow's cloak as security. That means she's owed you a debt and you needed security. You can't take her cloak. She might be sleeping in that thing. She may be extremely poor. Guys, is this a burden? Am I really to believe that the law's done away with and I should deny justice to a fatherless, to an orphan? Or to a foreigner? Like, just because they don't live in my country, I need to deny them justice? Is the law done away with? Of course not. There's a ton of verses in these passages in Deuteronomy we're reviewing today. If you find yourself in a confrontation, unfortunately it becomes a confrontation, but I would love to call it a discussion. But sometimes the other side really can't handle themselves very well because they're just repeating dogmatic, non-scriptural ideas. But you could take them here. Deuteronomy 24:17. Oh, you think the law's done away with? Okay, well, here's the law. You saying I now have to deny justice to the fatherless and the widow and the foreigner? You want me to be a jerk to people that weren't born here? You want me to be cruel to people without parents? You want me to be a jerk to widows? Is that what you're saying? Like, none of it makes sense. That's why they're just repeating what they've been told, taking these metaphoric terms from the New Testament out of context because they don't know the Old Testament. So just what I would suggest is just to do it with love and patience as much as possible. When you run into that type of deception, that type of speaking, and it's doublethink because they don't realize that they're contradictory on every level. Because naturally that person will tell you, well, wait a minute. No, I didn't say that. Of course you should act in love towards foreigners and people and orphans and people that are widows. Of course you should. Yeah, we got a food pantry and a widows program at the church that we give to, and we're part of that. We go and help on Saturdays with the food pantry. Okay, you're keeping Torah. Hallelujah and amen. Welcome to the family. You didn't know you were in it already, did you? It's called deception, guys. People just aren't thinking straight. That's what deception does. Verse 19, if you're harvesting in your field and forget a sheaf there, do not go back to get it. Is it to be left for the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow? it is to be left for the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. This is beautiful. Another idea of here, if these people are so destitute, they got to walk through the fields and find food for the day. Boom, it's there for them. Oh, what does this also assume? That people are growing their food. And everyone's not depending on the local market. The people are growing their food. Yeah. When you beat the olives from your trees, you must not go over the branches again. What remains will be with the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Another wonderful example of growing your own food, leaving the gleanings, taking the bulk, leaving the corners and the edges for those who might need them. Verse 21, when you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you must not go over the vines again. What remains will be for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Guys, this is the epitome of Torah. This is James 1:27, a pure and faultless religion. Those who looks after the fatherless and the widows and the orphans and keeps himself unpolluted from the world. This is the idea that this is the heart and the spirit of Torah. You're growing all this excess. You're probably going to be able to feed your family for months and months and months and have some to take to market and sell. Leave some of the edges, the corners, the gleanings, the things you missed. It's okay. Leave it there. Leave it there. The people might, if there's poor in your land, they'll have a chance to go through and grab some sustenance for the day. It's okay. Be good to them. Be merciful to them. And guys, tomorrow we're doing our Honor of Kings. We're going over the Testament of Job, and we're actually going to be looking at some unique claims of Job in the Testament of Job that talk about how he abided in this spirit of the Torah as well. But because he was so wealthy, he got to do it in a more organized way than just leaving the edges of your crops for the passerbyers. He got to do it in a very organized way. And we'll talk about that as Ken and I pick back up Honor of Kings next week. So, all right, guys, let's look at the book of Job in the canon. Okay. Job 29, 1-9. It says, and Job continued his discourse, how I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone above my head, and by his light I walked through the darkness. When I was in my prime, when the friendship of God rested on my tent, when the Almighty was still with me and my children were around me, when my steps were bathed in cream and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. That's interesting, right? When I went out to the city gate and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and withdrew. The old men rose to their feet. By the way, he was a king over Edom. The princes refrained from speaking and covering their mouths with their hands. Their voices of the nobles were hushed and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. For those who heard me called me blessed. Those who saw me commended me, because I rescued the poor who cried out and the fatherless who had no helper. So this is him also, what we just talked about, Deuteronomy 24. We're going to expound on that in the Testament of Job, but this is him referencing that type of behavior here in verse 12 of Job 29. Verse 13, the dying man blessed me, and I made the widow's heart sing for joy. How do you do that? How do you make a widow's heart sing for joy? Just because you're so amazing and beautiful and you look at them and they just swoon? No. He's providing for their needs. Guys, if you know anyone that's a widow, you know that they have needs. In fact, I think next week we're going to be talking about 3 different widows, possibly 2 specifically, but possibly 3 different widows that we're going to be talking about, setting up Amazon grocery lists for them and explaining some of their situations and giving our audience a chance to minister to those women that are in need right now. Okay. Verse 16, I was a father to the needy. That's awesome. That's what we just talked about in Deuteronomy 24. I took up the case of the stranger. That's what we just talked about in Deuteronomy 24, right? He does justice to the foreigner. I shattered the fangs of the unjust and snatched the prey from his teeth. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Deuteronomy 25. If there's a dispute between men and they are to go to court to be judged, so that the innocent may be acquitted and the guilty condemned, if the guilty man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall have him lie down and be flogged in his presence with the number of lashes his crime warrants. He may receive no more than 40 lashes, lest your brother be beaten any more than that and be degraded in your sight. Do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. When brothers dwell together and one of them dies without a son, the widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother is to take her as his wife and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law for her. The first son she bears will carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man does not want to marry his brother's widow, she is to go to the elders of the city gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. He's not willing to perform the duty of a brother-in-law for me. So then the elders of his city shall summon him and speak with him. If he persists and says, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal, spit in his face, and declare, this is what is done to the man who will not maintain his brother's line. And his family named in Israel will be called the house of unsandaled, or the house of one sandal, depending on the translation. If two men are fighting and the wife of one steps in to rescue her husband from one striking him, and she reaches out to her hand and grabs his genitals, you're to cut off her hand. You must show her no pity. We're going to go back in just a second with our companion passage and review that highlighted area. Verse 13, you shall not have two different weights in your bag, one heavy and one light. You shall not have two different weight measures in your house, one large and one small. You must maintain accurate and honest weights and measures so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God has given you. For everyone who behaves dishonestly in regard to these things is detestable to the Lord your God. Remember what the Amalekites did to you along your way from Egypt, and how they met you on your journey when you were tired and weary, and they attacked all your stragglers. They had no fear of God. When the Lord your God gives you rest from the enemies around you in the land that he's given you to possess as an inheritance, you are to blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. So, guys, now we want to go into Jubilees 44. So, Jubilees 44 is going to be, we're going to be actually reviewing what we just read about if one brother dies and he lives a wife, and then the other brother doesn't take her on as a second wife and provide child for her, then he's not keeping on his brother's family line. He's not growing the family house, and it's a dishonorable thing in Torah. Because what that also means is he's not willing to financially take care of his brother's wife. So he doesn't have the spirit of Torah either. It's not just about procreation. It's also about he would have to take her on for the rest of his life as a secondary wife and care for her. It doesn't mean he has to be passionately in love with her, but there is a requirement here that he would need to care for her, take her on. But here's what happens when brothers refuse to do that. So this is interesting. And I know that the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs also talks about this as well. I just didn't have time to add that passage in. It's also in the book of Zebulun in the Testament of 12 Patriarchs. So if you want to go read that, and it talks about the idea of where the sandals came from in relationship to, how they sold Joseph into slavery, and they took the money they got from the Midianites sellers, and some of the brothers went and brought sandals with them for them and their wives. So that's where the sandals come from. But the idea, we're going to go over the idea of what happens and what conflict arose from the moment that a brother refused to do what Deuteronomy 24 is explaining. Okay. And this is all the way back in Genesis, there in the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because like I've said before, they already knew Torah, guys. It's covenant behavior. They knew it. All right. So this is why they're being punished for not doing it. Jubilees 41, 1-5. In the 45th Jubilee, in the second week, in the second year, Judah took for his firstborn a wife from the daughters of Aram named Tamar, but he hated her and did not lie with her, because his mother was of the daughters of Canaan, and he wished to take him a wife of the kinsfolk of his mother, but Judah his father would not permit him. So many of you guys probably have experienced this in your life, where you've got the mother-in-law is just not being very helpful to anybody. So here's the bigger problem, and Jubilees talks about this later. Bathsheba is the wife of Judah. Judah disobeyed the covenant. So this is step one. Judah disobeyed the covenant, and he took a wife of the daughters of Canaan, of the men of Canaan. He took a Canaanite wife. And that's problem number one. Okay, not supposed to do that. And we're seeing the results on why the father instructed that, because they were raised in a completely different system and different mindset. And she then teaches her children, her boys, I want you to marry Canaanite women and not Israelite women, okay, which would be covenant women. She doesn't want her boys to marry covenant women. So here we take the daughters of Aram, which would have been extended family of Abraham, and extended family of Laban, which is the kinfolk of Isaac, right? It's extended family of Abraham, technically. So these are also supposed to be covenant people. Okay, so that's why he took Tamar. But didn't want that. Okay, he wanted a Canaanite girl, and so you got friction between Judah and Bethsua, the wife, about whom their kid is going to marry. So Judah tries to get his son, his firstborn son, a proper wife, so to speak, right? A covenant woman, and the wife is giving him grief the whole time. And she's also indoctrinating the kids to not want that, but to want something that's out of covenant. So verse 3, and this Er, the firstborn of Judah, was wicked, and the Lord slew him. So it doesn't give you a lot of breakdown. Also in Genesis 38, it has the same story that was wicked, and the Lord slew him. But that means he's not doing covenant behavior, guys, if he's being called wicked. Verse 4, Judah said to Onan, his brother, so now he's going to the other brother, go to your brother's wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her and raise up her seed unto your brother. Guys, that means Judah was already cognizant and aware and willing to enforce Deuteronomy 24's Torah, because it wasn't given for the first time in Mount Sinai. They already knew the Torah, guys. So verse 4, Judah now goes to the second brother and is like, hey, you got to do your duty with Tamar and raise up a seed for your brother's sake. Verse 5, Onan knew that the seed would not be his, but his brother's only. And he went into the house of his brother's wife and spilt the seed on the ground, and he was wicked in the eyes of the Lord, and he slew him. So what did he do now? So now the other brother, he goes and just uses Tamar for a quick moment, not intending to get her pregnant. So this is more wicked behavior. So now he's putting himself in the place of someone that's not willing to fulfill the obligation, but he is willing to step and treat her with disregard, not give her what she needs, not be willing to take care of her financially, but he's willing to go use her body. God slew him because God is enforcing Torah. Judah said unto Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain in your father's house as a widow until Shelah, my son, be grown up. And he gave you to him to wife, and I shall give you to him to wife. So basically saying to Tamar, look, I got another younger son. If you just hang out for a while, stay in our house and just wait till he's older, and then you can marry him, and you can be in covenant and family and have the right husband and be all right. Verse 7, and Shelah grew up, but Bethuel, the wife of Judah, did not permit her son Shelah to marry. So we got friction. Judah's got a rough marriage here, okay? He's got an unbelieving wife who's choosing to stay. And Bethuel, the wife of Judah, died in the 5th year of this week. Doesn't say why, doesn't say how, doesn't say what happened, but Judah is, Deuteronomy 24 and Romans 7, Judah is released from that marriage now that she's died. And number 8, in the 6th year, Judah went up to shear his sheep at Timnah and told Tamar, behold, your father-in-law goes up to Timnah to shear his sheep. And she put off, so then she concocts this plan, okay? She put off her, because remember, she's still living in the house. Mother's dead. and Onan are dead. She was kind of got her virginity taken by He didn't like her. Onan abused her. And now the mother, before she died, forbid Shelah to marry her. So now she's stuck like Chuck. Now she's stuck in this situation where she's a widow twice over in some weird way, maybe just once over, but possibly twice over in some weird way. And she's not a virgin anymore. And she's just trying to find a man. And she had to wait all this time for Shelah to grow up. Could have been a decade. Who knows how long it was. And then she doesn't, and that promise is not even kept to her. So my heart really goes out to this Tamar girl, man. She's just trying to live life and have a family, right? And this is all happening in Judah's house because Judah's not managing his household very well. And he put off widow's clothes, put on a veil, and adorned herself, and sat in the gate adjoining the way to Timnah. So she concocts a plan. I'm going to go and I'm going to put on bridal garments of a veil, which I'm not going to go into it for right now. It's pretty rough. But testament of in the book of Judah, in the testament of 12 patriarchs, it talks about what the practice of the Canaanites was for the women that put on these widows' clothes and put on a veil, and how they would sit and adorn themselves and sit at the gate of the entrance to these cities. It's not cool. It's not cool. So it says Judah was going along. He found her and thought her to be a harlot, because that's why she sat there and dressed like she did. Let me come in unto you. And she said unto him, come in. And he went into her. And she said to him, "Give me my hire." He said unto her, "I have nothing in my hand save this ring on my finger and my necklace and my staff, which is on my hand." I'm just laughing because I'm like, hey, to her, that's a lot. You got a lot. And she said back to him, "Give them to me until you do send me my hire." And he said to her, because remember what we talked about earlier, guys, Deuteronomy 23, you should not bring into Israel the hire of a prostitute or the temple wages of a shrine. You cannot pay a vow with that, with that money. She's talking about that kind of money right here. She's like, give me my hire. Give me some money for what you want to do to me right now. And then Judah went unto his sheep and went to her father's house, and she went to her father's house. So basically, if you guys can see this moment, she meets him at the entrance of the city. He then goes on to get his sheep sheared, and she runs back to his house. He didn't know it was her the whole time because she had a veil over her face. And apparently he's an extremely unobservant man, because I feel like I could have recognized her eyes, but maybe, I don't know, maybe not. I don't know what the veil looked like. Maybe it covered her whole face. Maybe it was like a Rona shield and just covered her whole face. Who knows? And so Judah sent a kid of the goats by the hand of the shepherd, Adulamite, and he found her not. And he asked the people of the place, saying, "Where's this harlot who was here?" And they said to him, "There's no harlot here with us." And he returned and informed him and said unto him that he had not found her. So I asked the people of the place, and they said to me, "There's no harlot here." Now, adding more shame to more shame, this guy actually has to send a servant to go pay the harlot's wages. It's crazy. So what did he explain to the servant? What are you doing here? What's going on? Why am I sending this girl a goat? What's happening here? Why is she getting this value? Why am I going to a harlot to give her a goat? What happened? Like, I wonder what kind of awkward conversation that was. Verse 16, he said, "Let her keep them, lest we become a cause of derision." And when she had completed 3 months, it was manifest that she was with child. And they told Judah, saying, "Behold, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, is with child by whoredom." And Judah went to the house of her father and said to her father and her brothers, "Bring her forth and let them burn her, for she has wrought uncleanness in Israel." And it came to pass, when they brought her forth to burn her, that she sent to her father-in-law the ring and the necklace and the staff, saying, "Discern whose are these, for by him am I with child." And Judah acknowledged and said, "Tamar is more righteous than I am, and therefore let them burn her not." And for that reason she was not given to Selah, and he did not again approach her. So she gets the child, but now she's going to be financially taken care of by Judah. So it worked out for her in some way. Financially, it worked out for her. She's got a child to grow with and carry on family, and that child's going to also help take care of her. But then also, Judah's going to take care of her and the child. So she got some out of this ridiculously twisted situation. She got some sort of good ending for herself, and Judah got reprimanded for his bad behavior. After that, she bare 2 sons, Perez and Zerah, in the 7th year of the 7th week. So therefore, it's assumed that she's now still with Judah. Okay. So now Judah is, because remember, Judah's wife died. So I'm guessing he just now took on Tamar forever. I don't know if he married a second wife or not. Verse 22, thereupon the 7 years of fruitfulness were accomplished, of which Joseph spoke to Pharaoh. And Judah acknowledged that the deed which he had done was evil, for he had lain with his daughter-in-law, and he esteemed it hateful in his eyes. And he acknowledged that he had transgressed and gone astray, for he had uncovered the skirt of his son and began to lament and to supplicate before the Lord because of his transgression. And we told him in a dream that it was forgiven him because he supplicated earnestly and lamented and did not commit it again. Now, there's 2 things I want to address here. One being that and Onan died. He didn't marry Tamar did not marry Shelah. And Onan are dead, so she's technically released from that marriage that Judah is mourning about. Judah still looked at her as a daughter-in-law. So now, realizing what he had done, thinking that it was a harlot, not realizing it's actually a daughter-in-law, he then still had this moment of regret, realizing that his bad behavior had all these unintended consequences, to which, even though Judah's wife had died, even though Tamar's 2 husbands had died, and they're legally and technically in the clear, it's okay. Judah still realized his bad behavior, his transgression, the evil that he had done. It was with his actual daughter-in-law, someone that he didn't look at initially as a wife, but his daughter-in-law. So he definitely, technically he's kind of in the clear, but he lamented for his transgression, asked forgiveness for it, and an angel told him in the dream it's okay. Obviously, don't do this behavior again, right? It's okay. He supplicated earnestly, it was forgiven him. He did not commit it again. So that's something to keep in mind. And because obviously Judah is a huge, huge component piece in Israel. being one of the 12 sons of Jacob. So, guys, there's a lot going on here. Okay, first of all, Judah shouldn't have taken a wife that against covenant, like was instructed. That caused all these problems, which caused the two sons being raised with non-covenant behavior and bad attitudes. They didn't have the spirit of the Torah. They didn't have the spirit of God within them. They're treating Tamar disrespectfully and didn't want anything to do with her. Tamar is becoming the victim in all this whole time. Judah then, actually, because of his continued non-Torah behavior, goes out and it still affects Tamar again, but it's kind of the father turns it around in a weird twist to bless her with children and to be provided and taken care of after all this, all these other people were treating her badly. So this is where a unique story where Judah is continuing to learn proper Torah. Tamar is kind of using the system of Torah to secure a place for herself and to get some sense of justice for herself. And then other people who were married into Israel were not assimilating into covenant behavior. They were not grafting in through their obedience. And this caused them to be an unbelieving spouse with unbelieving children who were unclean. Is that, you see what I'm saying? Where that 1 Corinthians 7 language comes from? This is the idea here. The unbelieving spouse didn't want to leave. She just caused constant problems and wanted to stay. She could have left, but she didn't. So this is what happens, unfortunately. And but Judah didn't divorce Bathsheba, and then just, I don't know the circumstances, but by a turn of events, Bathsheba dies, and then Judah's released from that. So then technically he can be with Tamar, even though he has mixed feelings about it, but he kind of entrapped himself in that situation. So it's very interesting, guys. Very, very interesting, all this stuff that's been happening here. Let's go on to read the last couple of verses. Judah received forgiveness because he turned from his sin. Judah received forgiveness because he turned from his sin and from his ignorance, for he transgressed greatly before his God. And everyone that acts this way, everyone who lies with his mother-in-law, let them burn him with fire, that he may burn therein. For there is uncleanness and pollution upon them. With fire let them burn them. So then it goes on to repeat Deuteronomy, like it talked about with, your in-laws, daughter-in-law, mother-in-law. You're not supposed to do this. Just like verse 26, do you command the children of Israel that there be no uncleanness among them? For everyone who lies with his daughter-in-law or with his mother-in-law has wrought uncleanness. With fire let them burn the man who has lain with her, and likewise the woman, and he will turn away wrath and punishment from Israel. So there's a lot going on here, guys. It's a big story, but the whole point is it's an example of no one's doing the right behavior, and there's all these bad consequences as a result, and then they finally have to learn right behavior at the end. So it's there's a lot going on. Okay, guys. Oh, I'm sorry. There's one last verse. I forgot. There was 27, 28. So Judah said that we had two, and unto Judah we said that his two sons had not lain with her, and for this reason his seed was established for his second generation and would not be rooted out. For in the singleness of eye he had gone and sought for punishment, namely, according to the judgment of Abraham, which he commanded his sons, Judah had sought to burn her with fire. So it's saying that here that they think that the two sons had not lain with her. So what does it mean that Onan spilled his seed and did not, maybe he didn't actually have sex with her? It's interesting. But he just spilled his seed on the ground. Maybe that was just some sort of protest against her, that he spilled his seed on the ground and wouldn't touch her. But ultimately, Judah is escaping punishment here by the skin of his teeth, I should say. I should say that. Yeah, Michael Stevens, it's kind of like a bad Shakespearean play. Could be the inspiration for those stories like that. Yeah, it's crazy. Guys, if you have any questions, put them in the all caps in the live chat, and I will try to address some of them for you. Jeremiah 15:16. If you're asking about Jeremiah 24 and taking off his shoe, like I said, I didn't have time to cover it today, but check out. It has to do, it's Testament of Zebulun, Testament 12 Patriarchs, and it has to do with the idea that the people that sold, the brothers that were participants in selling Joseph into slavery, they took that money they received for Joseph, and then they went and bought shoes, sandals, specifically for themselves and their wives. And so that's kind of where that idea comes from. No, my almighty God, she's great. No. I do not endorse Trump or any political candidate, but I'm not sure where you got that idea. All right, guys, looking for some questions if you have any. Jared Rice, I don't remember if Shelah was ever referred to again after the story in Genesis 38 and Jubilees 41. I don't remember or recall any follow-up with him. Sorry about that. Hannibal is asking, could the selling of an Israelite be because of what the brothers of Joseph did to him? Well, sure, but I think that law was in place beforehand, that you're not supposed to, like, I think all the Torah that we read from Deuteronomy 24 or 22 through 24 about the interaction between servants and a servant refuge from another master, and how you're supposed to let him roam freely in your land and not oppress him, or how you're supposed to treat people that are conquered in battle, and you bring them back and assimilate them in your culture. I think all of that was already a part of Torah that would have been passed down from Enoch way before Mount Sinai. So unfortunately, we don't have the text that doesn't tell us that, but I'm thinking this is why it was such an egregious thing for the brothers to sell Joseph, because they already knew that was wrong behavior. Hey, Anthony. Yeah, just let me know, brother. Send me a message and tell me. We'll see if we can find a time and that we can work out with our schedules. Sure, brother. Susanna Avery is asking, would you consider another roundtable discussion with a bride with others who share the mainstream view? Yeah, and that was the thing that kind of confused me, because Jake and Tony, I guess, had changed their view, since my understanding of their view was very different going into that conversation. But yeah, I've asked other people that have the mainstream view that are teachers of that view, and they just say no. So props to Tony and Jake for willing to talk about it with me, regardless of their view and how it may grow or change over time. But other people I've invited to that discussion just say no, or just don't reply. So I do big shout out to Jake, Grant, and Tony Stover. I got to see them. Just like Anthony Dickinson, I got to see you, brother. And who else is in the chat here? I got to see it take on the world. Colin, I got to meet Colin and his family. And it was good seeing everybody. Amelia is asking, based on scripture, do you need a pastor or priest to be considered married? No, I don't see any specific place where it tells you that you have to do I don't see any type of marriage ceremony listed. Definitely, I would suggest an elder that's covenant, that's someone that understands how to walk in discipleship to Yeshua, that's doing the commandments, someone that he may not technically be a pastor, he may not technically be a priest. It could just be your father if he's, someone that's you would consider an overseer, an elder in your faith, that shares your faith with you to witness your union in the sight of God. All right, guys. Hannibal is asking a question for Simple Life Homilies. Please explain Ezekiel 20:25. There were some bad laws given, a greater prophet than Moses came to perfect it. Well, no, I don't. I think you're paraphrasing. I've actually already, I can't remember which episode it was, but I did already answer this question in great depth, but that's my fault for not cataloging it so that I could have it as a quick reference for you. Let me pull up real quick and we'll run through it. All right, guys. So this is kind of the important part of this. Just he gave them over, right? This is what happens when people persist in unrighteousness. Verse 24 is some of your context to help you understand this. They did not practice his ordinances. They rejected his statutes and they profaned his Sabbaths. They were practicing idolatry. So these are not Yahweh's laws that these people are practicing that were not good for them. They're practicing the laws of the foreign gods of other lands. This is part of the apostasy that was happening during the days of the kingdom of Judah and the days of Ezekiel, leading into the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar. They had returned on the covenant. And they were worshiping false gods from other lands. You see that in Ezekiel chapter 8 and 9. So that's why they're pronounced unclean, and their gifts are sacrificed, and they're first passing their children through the fire. So that's why he punishes them. They were worshiping false gods and idolatry. So hopefully that's a help to you. Hopefully that answers your question. Robert Daniels, I break this all down. If you want to go check out Identity Crisis is your first option. Okay. So if you type in if you type into the YouTube search bar, Kingdom in Context, Identity Crisis Averted, Averted, Averted. Kingdom in Context, Identity Crisis Averted. It's like 45 minutes. I do a full breakdown with timelines and charts, and Jeremiah chapter 3, and Isaiah chapter 50, and Leviticus 26, and Deuteronomy 4, and Judges chapter 2, and show you that narrative that you're repeating in your question is absolutely not in Scripture. Absolutely not. So that's the first. And if you're not convinced with that 45 minutes, I have another playlist on my channel. It's the Bride series, and the Bride part 1 and 2. You're welcome to check that out. And between those 3 videos, you should have a better grasp on this idea of what I was saying today in short, which was that that Yeshua's death was to get him to his priesthood so that he can create resurrection for us, which is the fulfillment of the covenant. It wasn't so that we could be married back to Israel again. And I show you in that first video, Identity Crisis, that the Father promises them over and over and over and again that they're not kicked out of covenant if they mess up. They just need to repent and they'll be back in. And I show with Scripture, also 2 Corinthians chapter 30, the whole chapter, and even verse chapter 35 as well. Or excuse me, 2 Chronicles 30 and 35. I show you with great examples in that first video how that narrative that is propagated through a lot of prominent teachers is absolutely bunk. It's not scriptural, and I've reached out to big prominent people and asked them to come on a show and talk about it, and they say no. And so we'll just have to leave it at that. I presented my evidence with a great abundance of why that theory makes no sense whatsoever and is unscriptural, literally to the point where the words say something exactly opposite. This isn't just Sean's interpretation of the words. The words say exactly opposite of that teaching. So this is where that teaching confuses people, so they don't even look at the proper teaching, which is the priesthood of Yeshua and why the Messiah actually came. So this is where, please check that out if you have a chance. It'll help you greatly, brother. But I appreciate the question. Mama Lou Bear, in a sense. Yeah, in a sense. Guys, you'll start to realize the more you learn Torah, there's a ton of examples in Genesis of people not doing Torah, and specifically not doing Torah that could lead to death. But they're shown an incredible amount of mercy, just as you and I are in our lives. So just because they were in Israel doesn't mean they were good at doing the behavior of covenant yet. This is why you're constantly refreshing your mind with the water of the word. You're learning this behavior throughout your life. It's called sanctification. You're discipling over time, getting better and better at doing the behavior of Yeshua, which is the Torah. So, yeah, it's a good question, Mama Lou Bear. Noel Zo Young is asking, another member had a question about how someone could transgress the law after Yeshua returns. Well, if they're not resurrected and given their glorified bodies and heart with the law written on it perpetually, and they never sin again, then they're just a normal human that lives as a survivor of the day of the Lord, well, then that person will still be able to sin. So that's why they, in Isaiah 2:2-5 and other places, Isaiah 61, they have to, all the inhabitants of the nations of the earth, they come to the New Jerusalem to learn Torah, to learn the proper behavior, so they can get better at practicing not transgressing the law. So yeah, that's That's how, because they're still mortal. Jason Kinney's asking, were any of the righteous men in the Bible punished for having more than one wife? Not punished, because in the law there's this caveat where the reasoning you could take on it, like we read today in Deuteronomy 24, that's the caveat why you could take on a second wife. No, that was not intended. That was the that was what happens when tragedy strikes, right? The husband dies, and who's going to take care of his wife? Well, the other brother's supposed to step up and do it. Very specific circumstance. We're told Deuteronomy 17:17, kings should not multiply wives or horses. I think it's kind of weird that the word horses is thrown in there, but definitely, we see that problematic with Solomon's life. We also see it problematic with David's life too, even outside of Bathsheba. There's some other places. You go back earlier in 1 Samuel, he ended up using Deuteronomy 22 actually at one point, and that wife didn't like him very much. And so I can't remember if I don't know. It just the way it's worded, it doesn't sound good. These people are not perfect by any means. So this really goes more into the conversation of. Let me not get too distracted here, but it does go into the conversation of what we're calling righteous. Someone that keeps Torah throughout their life, meaning they are going to sin, but they have this priesthood that the Father's put as a mechanism within the covenant, so that He knows you're going to mess up and sin and transgress. That's why He has a priesthood there to make atonement for you and mediate for you. You follow that process unto death with a repentant heart, even though you sometimes make mistakes and mess up, but you repent. You follow that. That means that the priesthood is making atonement for you. That story read in Jubilees chapter 41, where Judah repented. Well, that he would have had to go give a guilt offering to Levi, who's ministering at Bethel. That was explained to us back in Jubilees 32. So he also went to a priest, repented, provided the guilt offering, changed his behavior. And then that was the process that then Judah could be considered righteous. Yes, he made a mistake, but that mistake was covered over. So in the eyes of the Father, if he continues in that behavior of repentance, even when mistakes have been made, he still can die a righteous man. Because we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. We all make mistakes. This is the problem of mortality in human life, and the law of the sin nature that's within our flesh. That Paul talks about at the end of Romans chapter 7 about doing what you don't want to do, and what you want to do, you find yourself not doing. And so this is the battle, the struggle with temptation throughout our life, and just sometimes not even deception, but just lack of information. You're doing bad behavior because you haven't been told better yet. But once you get told better yet, then you start practicing that new information to get better at that. And that whole process of practicing righteousness, knowing that you're going to fail from time to time, and you have a priesthood to atone for you, is that whole process Yahweh calls righteousness. Now, you don't get your eternal righteousness. You don't get your Christ-like righteousness until you get to the resurrection, where you never sin again. But while we're in this life, we still make mistakes. So were men told from the beginning to take on multiple wives at will? No. One man, one woman, they become one. Not one man and 50 women become one. One man, one woman become one. That was the intended plan. That was what was set out. Now, once you have family, once you have extended family and a community, and there's tragedy that strikes, the Torah has the allowance there for a man to take on the responsibility, raising seed, and the financial responsibility of that woman as well, so that she and that part of your family's cared for, right? That was part of your brother's family. That's so that people can be cared for, not so that a man can go and lustfully attach more women to himself. So there's, I guess, the biggest difference in why these men of the Bible were not punished was because they didn't go and do this and just because they wanted to be a man with a big harem. A lot of the women that David had assumed were because those were women that were not, they didn't have a place to be cared for from the people that he had conquered. So they come into his, they get cared for by coming in. So we don't know all the details about every single woman that was in David's 300 wives or whatever, right? Unfortunately, we don't know that. It does focus on specific women that he married and seemed to interact with and the narrative of some of the stories focuses specifically on that. But they're not, I guess if David does get punished, by the way, for taking another man's wife. So he does get punished for that. And that's really horrific that happened. So because Bathsheba did become his wife after that, and he had Solomon through Bathsheba, right? So there's been men that are called righteous in the Bible that did get punished for taking more than one wife. How they took them is the thing I want people to focus on. That's the dividing line, is why did they add another wife to their family? It wasn't because you just have free reign to go get a bunch of women and create a harem. That's not in the Torah. That's not allowed. That's not instructed. That's not the example of Genesis 1 and 2. It was, the only reason was a caveat is if there was an emergency situation and someone needed to be cared for and seed needed to be raised up for your household. So, or if you're bringing them in because I guess it's still an emergency situation if there are conquered peoples and the women have no one to take care of them and they get brought into, the concubines of the king and be cared for by the king since no one else could take them on. So there's something to consider there. Okay. What happened to all the, 20,000 Midianite women that were assimilated in the book of Numbers? I think in Numbers chapter 31, they're assimilated into Israel after the Midianites were destroyed. You had a lot of, I don't know if men took on second wives at that point, or if they just had them all just hang out and kind of got them prepared to marry the young Israelite boys that were coming up in that day. Unfortunately, some of these details in the scriptures they're not fleshed out as much as I would like them to be. But thankfully, we do get enough from the Messiah. In the beginning was man and one woman. We get that from Genesis as well. And then we get moments where there were righteous men who were either tricked into a situation like Jacob, or they were unfaithful in a sense by listening to the voice of their wife, like in the story of Abraham and Sarah, and then taking our Hagar. But ultimately, you don't see any prescription for men taking on multiple wives other than an emergency situation. All you see is a prescription for everything we read in Deuteronomy 22, that if a man's married, he's married already, right? He's not supposed to go out and take another woman. And a man is definitely not supposed to take another woman that's already married. So the whole purpose was one man, one woman. The only time that changes is if there's an emergency. So that's detailed in Deuteronomy 24. Hope that helps, Jason. It's kind of a long answer, but there's a lot to it. We've actually done a video on this. 1 second. It's in my Milk and Meat playlist. I think I did it with my wife one night about a year ago. We talked about this kind of stuff. Give me 1 second here. Okay, yeah, I think it's in this one here. Oh, no, it's in this one. Okay. So I'm going to put this. I'm going to put this in the chat for you, Jason, if you want to watch this later. Biblical marriage. And my wife and I did a Milk and Meat. And hopefully that'll help you out. 223. Yeah, I don't know if you heard me quickly say sometimes they would take women as concubines because they were conquered nations and there was no one to care for them. So they would take them in and to the king's care as his 480th wife. Just depend on the circumstances of if there was not anyone to take them, then the king would take over. That's why he had all the money, all the power. He could do that. But it doesn't. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't see anything in scripture that says David just ran around and just was at all times, because he got in trouble when he did this with Bathsheba. So I don't see David or Solomon saying that they just run around and were just taking women at their choice. And those are the only circumstances. Those are the only women that I think he inherited a lot of the women from Saul. I have to go back and read 1st and 2nd Samuel. David inherited a lot of the women from Saul that he had to take care of. But as far as the righteous kings, Hezekiah just had one wife. They don't run around and just choose women at random to add to their harem. It was usually that women that needed it, that were in trouble, you know. Yes, Anthony Dickinson, absolutely, polygamy is out the door. Okay, guys. I think that is all my voice can do for now. So you guys are awesome. Thanks for being here. And we won't take any more questions. But guys, hit the like button, subscribe if you like what we're doing, share this in social medias if you think that this was worthwhile. And so I hope that you guys were blessed by what we talked about today and the breakdown. Thank you for being here with me. It's been almost 2.5 hours now. So I'm going to let you leave today with a beautiful song that I hope you enjoy. It's from the same group that we heard at the beginning of the broadcast, a group called Shane and Shane. This song is called Yearn, and it's just it's great. Hope you guys enjoy it.
Holy design, this place in time, that I might seek and find my God, my God. Lord, I want to yearn for you. I want to burn with passion over you, and only you. Lord, I want to yearn for you. I want to burn with passion over you, and only you. Lord, I want to yearn. Your joy is mine, yet why am I fine? With all my singing and bringing grace, in light of Him, I want to yearn. and all